Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Concise Conversations with Cathy and Jackie. In the tradition of getting some great guests in the recent weeks, today's guest is Jenni Donohoo. We are so excited to have her. And I, as usual, am going to step into the background and kick it over to Cathy.
We are so excited to have you, Jenni. Thank you so much for being a part of Concise Conversations today.
Oh, thank you, Cathy. It's my pleasure.
Well, we are just thrilled. The purpose of Concise Conversations is to bring information and good cheer to our members, particularly during this challenging time. And I know that our mutual friend, Jackie Walsh, is really looking forward to the conversation, as am I. And she's going to ask the first question.
Thank you, Cathy. And Jenni, it is just a delight to see you. It was so much fun to have you in Alabama about 2 summers ago, face to face, and you developed quite a following then. And now we can't have you face to face, but virtual, we'll take it. And particularly knowing you were to have been in Australia today, you actually are physically in Canada where you live, but here you are with us, and we are so grateful to you. Most people know, Jenni, that you have done extensive work on collective teacher efficacy. And in fact, your books have meant a lot to Alabama educators. And I think we've had a lot of people really embrace that work. So, I have some concerns thinking about the pandemic, where we are in terms of just not being able to anticipate our futures and living in uncertainty. In what ways might this challenge collective teacher efficacy in really very specific ways? Because I know that you associate lots of different kind of components with efficacy. So what's at risk if we don't watch ourselves?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jackie. Well, we know through psychology and research on pandemics that people tend to have elevated negative affective states during a pandemic. And affective states are basically the emotions we feel, feelings and emotions. And we know that anxiety is increased as a result of the unknown that the pandemic has challenged us with. And we also know that there are 4 sources of efficacy shaping information for individuals and teams, and affective states is one of those sources. So as our feelings of anxiety increase, that tends to diminish our efficacy. And on top of that, we know that efficacy beliefs are situational specific. And so if a teacher or a team of teachers might have a good sense of efficacy for their ability to teach and engage students in a face-to-face environment, that might be diminished when needing to teach in a remote situation. So there's that added layer and risk around the anxiety, the negative affective states, and the situation that we're faced with.
It seems like every day something else happens, or we just don't know when the next shoe is going to drop. Well, you talked about one source. Are there other sources?
Yeah, so there's 4 sources that individuals tend to rely on from their past experiences when they're shaping their future beliefs about what they're capable of accomplishing. Affective states are one, again, I think more elevated in today's situation than in the past. And then the other 3 sources are when we see others meet with success, we tend to raise our efficacy because we see others do it and we start to believe, well, if they did it, then surely we can do it too. And a second or third source is also mastery experiences. And that's a pretty potent source because it's based on a firsthand experience. When we have succeeded, we tend to believe that as long as we interpret that success through a growth mindset and attributing that success to our efforts, then we start to think, well, if we did it once, surely we can do it again. And then the final source is through persuasion, when somebody that we trust convinces us that we should take risks and that we have what it takes to succeed. So the 4 sources, again, in summary, are affective states, mastery experiences, vicarious experiences, and social persuasion. It's usually delivered in the form of feedback.
You know, Jenny, I want to return to affective states and more specifically to your mention of heightened anxiety. You know, we've heard so much about teachers in particular needing to take care of themselves. But what would that heightened anxiety really mean for a school, and what particularly might leaders do to address that concern?
Well, this reminds me a lot of the work of Shirley Ford and Jean Hall and the
Yeah.
concerns-based adoption model. And in particular, one aspect of that model addresses the stages of concern, and that's the affective dimension of change. And it's the feelings and emotions that we're talking about. And Hall and Hord did extensive research on predictable aspects of change in schools over many, many years. And in their stages of concern model, they note that typically when asked to change or do something different, people go through various stages of concern. And it starts with perhaps unconcern being the first stage. And that might be because we're not really aware that something's on the horizon. And I think back to March, people probably, weren't very concerned because we didn't know really what was going to happen. And as March led into, the second and third week, the next stage of concern is really around information. People need information, and districts were scrambling in my experience, and communication was haphazard and perhaps, changing from day to day. So as the information doesn't come in, our next stage of concern, which is personal, becomes more elevated because we don't know what's going on and we're getting different messages. And unless we address information and personal concerns, we can't move beyond them, is what the model says. But once we can address personal concerns, like the personal concerns might sound like, how much time is this going to take? What's this going to be required of me in order to be able to do this? And once we start figuring that out, the next stage is management concerns, and we start to try to figure out how to manage the change in our practice. So how are we going to, if it's online learning that we're using as an example, we might be looking into different management systems and learning, how to manage teaching in an online environment. I just want to talk about the final stages because this is where we really want to get people. Once we can get past personal and management concerns, which are really related to task and self, we move into the impact concerns. And that might sound like, what does this mean for my students? How can I give them the best online learning experience so that they're coming back? How can we engage students? And those impact concerns is really where we need our people to be if we're going to meet the needs of our students. And those impact concerns are really at three levels. It starts with consequence. So the consequence is related to our students. And then it moves to collaboration. How am I going to collaborate with my colleagues so that we can, share this information? And then finally refocusing. And that's where we get so comfortable with the change that we start to own it. And so I think maybe that's been resonating with people based on this situation that we've been faced with in the last few months.
I think that's so helpful, Jenny, because hopefully in the spring, we begin to address the personal and the management concerns, and the focus can now really be on impact. And I know that's where all of our hearts want us to be. How can we keep our students moving and progressing in these different times? So that was most helpful.
So Jenny, listening to you and thinking particularly through the lens of building collective teacher efficacy, I thought about, how do you get that bridge? In what ways can leaders and teacher leaders help teachers move beyond the concern and management concerns, really to get to that impact, to perhaps understand that they're not alone, that through collaboration and through other steps they can work. But what advice do you have for those of us that are listening to you?
Well, I think for leaders who want to consider addressing teachers' concerns, it's important first to listen and to draw out those concerns. And then if and again, the model goes that we have to address the concerns at the level in which they're at. So if people have personal concerns, we have to help them understand what that means for them. And if people have management concerns, they're going to need information about different platforms to use. And I think that from what I've been seeing is when we connect teachers to their colleagues who have been having some success, who might have had concerns early on, but those concerns have been alleviated. I think that that's a great move for an administrator, is to listen and then try to connect people whose concerns have diminished over time. And then besides the concerns, the affective dimension, we can also tap into those other three sources. Although that might look differently as well, in this time in given the pandemic. And so, as I said, like the vicarious experiences being an important source of efficacy shaping information. However, we can't walk into someone's classroom, that's down the hall anymore. But what I've been seeing is people popping into the virtual classrooms, administrators setting up those opportunities for people to observe their colleagues and peers who are having success with different components of the online environment. And so providing those opportunities, and of course, it's ever so important to always have that social support of your peers, and making sure that we're spreading the successes, sharing those opportunities where we've met with mastery, and making it known so that we can start to enhance that collective efficacy of the group and the team.
Well, Jenni, I'm sure Cathy's smiling because the last few points you made certainly remind me of the Alabama Best Practice Center networks. Part of the mission is really to share successes so people will know that in this state there are people making real headway on collective teacher efficacy. So if it can happen there, it can happen here. And then I think, Cathy, about the social support as well, that the opportunity that we'll have this year as we go virtual, as a couple of networks, will be kind of exciting, really. And we are really, we are empathizing with what our colleagues out in the schools have been going through. So just a lot of points that Jenni made that really resonate today, Cathy.
Indeed. And Jenni, we have just a few more minutes. And before we went live, you were telling us about a new book you've written and the theme. And I know with many of our people are listening are instructional coaches. So would you preview that for us and let us know when it might be available?
Sure, Cathy. Thanks for that. So my co-author, and she's the lead author, Stephanie Height, and I have a book coming out, we think late October, maybe early November, with Corwin. And the book is entitled Leading Collective Efficacy, Powerful Stories of Achievement and Equity. And what we do is through the lens of the 5 enabling conditions that we know will help to foster efficacy in a school. We tell stories, case stories of real people in real schools that have had success in closing the achievement gap through collective teacher efficacy. And so we're very excited about that. And the book will be available sometime, like I said, in the fall.
Isn't that an area where we so need those vicarious experiences? And it sounds as if that's precisely what your book is going to provide, Jenni.
I think
well, so. It was fun being with you.
Thank you. I think it's timely. Like, a lot of people know what collective efficacy is based on John Hattie's work in the Visible Learning database. But I think that they're starting to work toward how do we foster this in our leadership practice. But they want examples. And I think that this is what this book provides.
Terrific.
And I know our instructional coaches, instructional partners will love that, because I think you tap into their expertise a lot in the book. So Jenni, we can't believe that it is now, the 15 minutes is coming to an end, and we are so grateful for you joining us today. You have just made our whole day and a whole month by being a part of this. So thank you so much for being with us.
And we can't wait until you can be back with us in Alabama face to face. Get some of those hugs.
Thank you.
Well, and back to you, Dakota, again. Thank you, Jenni.
Thank you, Cathy. It is always amazing to see how much information can be packed into 15 minutes. I was riveted the entire time, and I think what was said here today can apply to not only education, but every space. So everybody can find some use in these lessons. So to preview next week, our colleague Stony Beavers is going to be joining us to talk about the work we've been doing over the summer and kind of previewing the networks that are coming up very, very soon. So thank you all for tuning in. Jenni, thank you again for being our guest, and we hope you have a great rest of the week. See you soon.